Here we are sliding into September, right after the third interphase. Now, September actually was in here, so I don't know, whatever. But reinforcements for this, well, we're getting the 9th Army that replaces that army of detachments, which isn't on the board, so I get to deploy a new army. And basically it's on any rail line, I think, was the rule. But then I got distracted because, once again, I found something in here that doesn't quite work. Train 31 shows up on turn 10, along with this 7631 and 77 combo substitution. Well, 77's here, 7631, maybe not. And here's the problem. I look under core units and I find it, and these guys are here. And in fact, 7631's not in the game, only 76 plus 31 is. And okay, so these guys are supposed to show up on turn 17 instead, both the train and this 7631. Am I in the right scenario? Yeah. Okay. Was I in the right scenario there? Who knows? If I look at turn 17, 76 plus 31 is supposed to show up as a substitute for 7631. And now over here, 7631 is not here. I'm suspecting I'll find all of that under turn 17. And I think the sequential guide is the correct one, this one that goes by game turn. But, you know, I could go check, see if it's been erraticized. Who knows, though? It may not have. You know, I don't count on. So here's one of the things, and why I like my errata to be in a separate sheet. I don't count on it all just making it in. So sometimes you'll run into things. You know, not that many people play the game over the whole time. Maybe they raise the issue, maybe they just resolve it like I normally would, and you know, you can't guarantee it's going to show up, which means that, well, maybe it's not in your errata sheet, and that's fine. If you had the living rules, you'd be facing the same problem, but you'd be looking between, well, if I go down and check, I'd be looking between two different rule sets. Of course, if I'm trying to work just off the living rules, I'm either working off a shitty photocopy, something that I paid 20 bucks to get bound and printed, you know, like this one was, that was included in the cost of the game, or I'm working on an electronic copy that like is not really functional for me. So it's easier for me to just fucking make up the rules rather than try to work this out, because I'm pretty sure I know what's going on. But yeah, I mean, it just, if there's no way to tell where the changes are in the rules, I mean, I find living rules with modifications turned on, like I don't remember, like review notes or something like that. They red bar it to show you where changes are between the different versions. I find that obnoxious because I have to hunt through a huge rule book, you know, in this case, what, like 28 pages to get the errata into my actual rule book. But at least it's somewhat usable. Here, I would have to go word by word and try to look for the differences throughout the rule book to try to get a current rule book in the printed rule book. With the little red bars, I can hunt through and do it. With an actual errata sheet, well, you know, I just update things as they are. And I don't mind that there's a living rule set, but it really should indicate changes at the very least. And honestly, there should be a fucking change log. The only good thing to say, if they had provided those things, you could write the rules very easily in this rule book because it's not written on plastic or whatever the hell GMT uses to write their rules on now. In 2013, they were still printing on paper. I do have this annoying facet where I have to discover where the 44th division is to place this. And then I have this combo substitution, which means the 31st may not even come in. That's going to be, well, who knows? I got to find them. The 44 2 call ch. 44 and 2 call ch. Is that just one unit? Here's the 2 call ch, so the 44th is here. So those two divisions are going to, at some point, combine and turn into these two different size divisions. Oh, God. It's painful, you know. This kind of technique of replacement and such not, it works okay on a smaller game, but on something this fucking big, it just hurts. It hurts. And it may be one reason to stay away from the big operational stuff. You know, the big strategic stuff lets you choose what units you buy and whatnot, and do upgrades and stuff like that. And the tactical stuff, units aren't changing what they are. And everything at the operational level just feels a little bit uglier to me in general. I'm not a fan of it, although I guess I prefer operational World War I to tactical, at least on the ground. Yeah, I think I've faced enough by looking at this. And I think it's time for me to go to bed and take my nap or have a cigar or something. I really don't feel like dealing anymore. Having troubles with my camera again. You know, I bought this just last year or something. Anyway, heavy expense to the setup for this one with just a few pieces. I mean, just this little slice here. But anyway, I'm deciding to put the 9th Army to take over some of that broad span that the 6th has. Got a lot of crowded units over here. It might have been sensible to put it between the 1st and 2nd. I don't know. It's just a question of where I feel most compelled to slide a new army. It doesn't really make a whole hell of a lot of difference. Obviously, 6th Army is rather full. They might be able to take over some of the 2nd. I don't know. And the 2nd is not a very wide lift, and then the 2nd could take over some of the 1st. I find this kind of an artificial divide, but, you know, I mean, it's going to be an artificial divide no matter what. If I put the 9th in there and just took all of this, the 1st would be tiny, and that wouldn't make a lot of sense either. 2 substitution combinations that I had to look up, and I had to find the 44th division, which is luckily one of the substitution combinations. It's over here, which means there's a new corps, which ended up here, and even though it's linked to this unit in terms of within 5 hexes of it, I had to put it over in 2nd Army area, which probably doesn't need it, but who knows? Actually, yeah, we're full up on the 2nd Army as well, so I don't know. And then the other one required me to figure out some stuff with the Cav, because it's a Cav substitution over with the BF. The transfer of base finished, so the Brits are base down there. Base doesn't seem to mean a damn thing. It's just oh no, I'm in a dangerous place. I stuck it someplace stupid. It has no effect on play other than when you transfer it, it fucks with your supply capabilities. Maybe, you know, again, back to how you want to read that roll. And yeah, I'm kind of vaguely wishing that I had, instead of gaining this, but instead of sending all my forces up into the 1st Army, that I had pulled one more unit, give this up, and fill the line here, and just, you know, let the Alsace sit where it is, and get this real core back into play. Yeah. It's not really good, and I mean, I could just send a brigade or something maybe, because holding like this position would be probably pretty easy. I might be able to do it, might be able to dispatch another Cav division out there because they're fucking useless for the most part. They're too big. You know, if they were Cav regiments, they would be awesome. But they're too big, and that dance doesn't make a lot of sense. And now I'm on the, well, how do I arrange everything? Had to cut myself some more pieces of twist ties. Looked again in the hope that I had blue ones instead of white ones, because the white ones are fucking invisible. And yeah, I'm in a grumpy ass mood. Ended up sleeping for several hours during the day. And really kind of don't want to do a damn thing anywhere, anytime, in any way. Yeah, should be playing my video game instead. That helps drown me more than these things. And I got to consider, hey, do I want to dig in somewhere? And if so, where? And that's all pain. Yeah. And the reason I actually made that video was this particular combo. I don't even know if I fucking want to do it. It's these two units. They add up to about the same as these two. I'm just basically distributing. I get an extra attack point and lose a defense point. It means that this unit, which I'm not sure I really am happy with, but it could live in the mountain crags or something, ends up, you know, more of a standard unit. And this nice, big, meaty thing ends up weaker. Is that good? Is that bad? I don't know. But I have to run off the line and do some weird creative swapping with a unit that maybe isn't even hurt. Probably is. Yeah, it's a little hurt. So at least it has that. In order to do something of very little value, but I feel like I have to, because otherwise I will lose track of what the fuck these guys are supposed to be able to do. You know? The only reason that I know, and the Serbian game has a different thing where they use the same symbol on the replacement that they have on the board, is that I'd have to look up and try to figure out what turn this happened. Again, unless I created some additional bookkeeping mechanism to remind me of that. But yeah. Apparently the game designer has a video. I hate looking at any videos, so. I mean, I just don't have, I do not have the patience to watch a game being played in this way, where he shows how the Germans actually push aside that northern front. Now, the real question that I have is, if you push the Belgians aside more rapidly than I did, I think you end up with the Brits not making it as far as they should. I don't know. Again, unless both sides are just running full tilt with, you know, using lots of force marching, which I'm so antagonistic to weakening my forces. And this isn't the strength point losses. The point was brought up that the replacements are pretty common here. Yeah, I don't know if they really are. I get 2 per army every 3 turns right now. Eventually it goes up. But right now, I'm not pulling a whole, and not in total quantity, but the amount that I'm allowed to put into play in any given place. The total quantity doesn't go up that much. But you can see I'm banking some with the French at least. Not so much with the Germans. They have, what, 1 extra replacement point? Geez, man, it's not just the replacements that are an inhibiting factor towards pushing forward. In fact, the biggest thing I could do to push forward would have been force marching, and you're not allowed to in the first 2 turns, so that takes away part of the ability to move forward. And the other thing is, that's CEL losses, not the strength point losses. The strength point losses you get from making attacks before you reach your goal, or if you continue making intense attacks, or intense defenses for that matter. Why do I not particularly like doing them? Because you're just trading losses for a space, and generally a space is not that valuable. Generally what breaks the enemy is they don't have enough units to defend the line. That's what we finally saw here. Or the units they have fallen apart so much. Another part of what we saw where the Belgians had to withdraw. If we had the Belgians all on the line, we'd be, right to the edge of the Netherlands or whatever. Anyway. I find it kind of weird. I'm not sure how much so. The game comes with pieces for the Dutch, but presumably for some expansion or something, but that would require a map overlay. Probably would anyway, simply because it would have to pull back into Germany as well. I don't know. All right, I think I have the French Entente movement completed. Hey, I got somebody on a rail. You don't need them much because the units are mobilizing and showing up using the rail network already. And I think that's why the Germans have no railway capabilities. The initial offensive requires so much mobilization and moving resources to the front. This was a hellacious turn for a defensive setup. First of all, I had to give a lot of ground up here. And in order to rationalize my line, yeah, I left a fort or a fortress behind. There's just no other. Otherwise, I would be anchored using a lot of troops to defend something, and that fortress would just become a weakness. So as it is, screw it, let it die. And let's see. I'm trying to put something into my mind because no, it's along the Muse line. Okay, yeah, because I've got little snapshots that the designer provided of the first couple turns advance, showing how the Germans can make their advance. And first of all, I think that I was mistaken. I think that I was feeling, I know it recently, I was feeling like I couldn't do forced marches during the first couple turns of the game. That's not the case. The French can't do forced marches on the first turn of the game, is all. And most of the German units are already, I guess, performing actions that are game-like actions, invading Belgium and whatnot. But it's just sort of preset, so you can't do anything up there. But the advances are good enough. Anyway, beyond that, what do we got here? It should probably be here. Where one of the problems showed up was that 31st Corps. What I found was, hey, one of the units I was combining into is part of the 31st Corps. Now that's okay, I could leave it separated. I was sending it out to the 6th Army because there was space for there. But I found it after I had already allocated more space to the south on the 2nd Army. I'm getting confused. First, 2nd, and 6th Army, 31st Corps. And yes, there are corps that are down in those low numbers too. But so I kind of reversed things and sent that corps back down to where command things. I'm giving up a little bit of space down here. This is really to allow me to, one, rationalize the line, but also to recover strength points, or not strength points, but morale capabilities of the CELs. Even though I slept the whole day away, I kind of don't feel like I'm going to complete an entire player turn today. I just feel so fucking fatigued with life and everything. Oh well. Okay, so what are we looking at? The Germans did their movement, and they have a couple of planned attacks. Over here, there's a weak spot. The others are on fortifications. I didn't want to do anything else. My armies are getting pretty healthy. This over here is still working its way up. I actually shoved that extra core over there, I think, which I had over on the first army. The reason for that is just to remind me, because I'm going to want to unload him here. I hope I'm not screwing something up. I can change my mind if I am. I don't mind cheating. But the reason for that is I need room for the second corps, because they're going to start taking Antwerp. Antwerp's about ready to fall. We broke through the outer line of fortifications, and now we can start busting up the fort inside, which is pretty easy, to tell you the truth. At least I assume so. I'm also going for this fortress, and I'm positioning myself for beginning to attack on Nancy and do some bombardment there. I should drop an attack marker just to remind me of that. I don't think that there's anything that the Entente wants to do as a counterattack. This might be interesting. that looks appealing. If the Germans are going to open up a hole of that nature, we'll see if those may not both be, that may be a fortress actually, but we'll think about that. But yeah, for the most part, I'm not doing a whole lot here during the counterattack phase, or during the counter move phase, to prepare for attacks. Cover a couple of things because I made an error. We'll talk about it in a moment. But that counterattack worked really well. That's one of the things I wanted to touch on. It caused 2 CE loss to the German unit, which now it really impedes the decision that I had made to move forward. I probably would have been better, I don't know, pulling everything out maybe and trying to launch another attack. There's something kind of nice about that wave forward, wave back. Granted, it wasn't on this scale, but it feels like it's that kind of, run back to the trenches, man. Even though there are no trenches yet. I really ought to be building that for someone. Yeah, there are definitely places where I could have started digging in that I have not. And really have to fucking remember. There's so much in this game, and I'm not used to dealing with those all over the place, and there's a pile showing up. But what happened here was I was ready to attack, and I noticed this little tiny number here. That's the abandonment number. When you move next to a fort, there's a chance, and a very good chance in the case of these, that they'll just run away. And in this case, there's no garrison unit on the back, or no whatever component, infantry component on the back that'll become available to you, which makes sense because there's really nowhere to run anyway. One of them, the one that I was going to attack, should have run away right away. So I actually attacked this exit. It was easy to take, and during my next move, we're going to be occupying, I presume, both hexes. Well, it may be a little hard because there's a zone here, isn't there? Yeah, maybe with a force march or something. And take Antwerp out. And that'll allow me to start pushing that second corps forward. He's actually out of supply where he is, which is also... he's not isolated. Let me check, because I may not want to advance. There's no real reason for me to advance there. Oh, yeah. I don't want to read the rules, so I won't advance. Normally, I've got all kind of supporting units near me when I'm attacking, so it's not hard to leave those advances. But that's how I got myself into this problem, was advancing into a hex with supporting units and then having to rationalize the forces that I had there for an attack, and I left somebody there, and the French are like, screw it, man, let's beat it up. And our bombardment succeeded. We broke the fort. I don't know what that's going to matter, because at the beginning of the next French turn, they get to repair it. So unless I can get enough force on there to take that hex, and I mean, it's exposed, but it's also strong, and I have a lot of trouble here. I'm at the junction of two of my armies. I can shift things around, but I got to find some place to put them, and that's kind of the problem. Which might mean the 15th R gets shifted over to the 5th. It's like this corps with no troops in it that, you know, it's just getting flung around. I don't know what to do with it. I'm having trouble finding space. It probably would have been best just sitting it with the 7th, because I have no command for it. I will be getting another army container, not really an army, but a Strasbourg, like sort of back end, probably place to keep my corps that have no troops in them or something. None of the fortresses fell, which is a shame, because it means I have to keep working on them. I didn't bombard this because I packed up my guns to go send them moving somewhere. I mean, it's okay. That's going to go away as soon as these fall, but that probably isn't going to be this turn. We'll see. Again, I might have to force march. All right, that puts us to the German turn, and I think, done for the night. Who knows? Who the fuck knows? Because I took a big long nap, like 3 hours today, and don't know what else. But it's hard for me to come up here late at night if I'm not like in some kind of insane mood like I was last night. More weirdness with the substitutions and the reinforcements. First of all, with the Strasbourg army come into play, what I can see, it can actually take over this entire command. And that would free up, it's limited geographically to Strasbourg. Then I can use it like Alsace is, just as a placeholder. And I can use the 7th Army to send, probably what it's really meant for is to send an army up here, because there's going to be this huge bulge historically at this time. Well, that's not the case yet. But yeah, I can use it as a replacement for something else. I have to look at it. I'm pretty sure you can entrain these things, but I'm not absolutely positive. The other unit that showed up was, let's just show it, 5B landwehr substitution for the 5B landwehr line of communication unit. Well, I kind of screwed up there because I placed the way the order of how you set up is, as expressed here, showed the 5B landwehr unit first under independent infantry formations, but the LOC units, wherever they're going to be placed, LOC formations, comes after that. Now, what you needed to do was to set up the LOC formation first so that this counter was appropriately in play. And when I was setting up, I had a number of these cases where I'm like, well, that's weird. It doesn't have, it's a divisional unit. It doesn't have the little asset CEL on it, and it doesn't have a counter. That's odd. Well, now I understand it. How are you going to note these things? Yeah, it's a pain. Some of the choices made for how to present the game change the ordering on those two charts and that would be fixed, but it wouldn't be fixed if things go in both directions, which I'm sure they don't, but whatever. All right, and here it is, once again in the middle of the night, late, but I think I'm gonna start moving a few units at least. Oh, that's not how they work. Okay, so here's you can relocate them, and it takes 2 turns to do so, and that's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna relocate the 7th. It goes 2 turns out. Unfortunately, the next thing is it has a rule that says use the blue army destination markers. Well, I don't have anything like that I'm aware of. I have destination markers and I have a blue army marker. So I can use this and put it in the general vicinity I'm looking. And mainly I'm worried here between the 2nd and the 1st. So I'm gonna make my destination over there, and I'll put a destination marker on there too, just to remind me. Okay, but that reminds me of something that I was cheating with my little rail marker. You have to choose your destination before, you know, you end up getting there. And I did a lot of fiddling around. Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I would have picked my destination over here. I'd be running it over there. Then I'd be like, oh, it can't be under that command. And after it got here, I would have swapped it. It would move again. I'd waste another turn with it. It doesn't really matter because there are no units in this command. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, I will take the 7th off the board from there. Slip Strasbourg down. And be happy. Yay. I guess. I don't know. Anywhere where I'd think about attacking straight up, not quite. This is one example where it's not. I'm using forced march to use prepared attacks. If we're talking about a couple movement points or something, the chance of taking a CEL hit is really, really low. So I've become kind of addicted to the forced marches. I used it to grab Antwerp, stuff along that line. And we're making attacks all along the line now because I feel exuberantly more powerful. Plus, the French line is a little stretched, and since I don't have to worry about compacting back into the contiguous line right away, I'm early in the cycle of the interfaces. I broke my positioning, and I'm launching an assault in 2 different directions, basically. Not exactly, but whatever. This is actually part of the 6th Army that's hitting here. I also split off a couple of units under Strasbourg's command, finally got this set up, so I'm launching an attack from 2 different armies over here in that corner. But the main thing is this massive charge of the 1st and 2nd armies to try to make up for the ground that we have not gained yet. And also even pushing way up into here, which is I think where the 7th Army is going to end up, is somewhere up in the north. Probably half the 1st Army is going to be split into it, so that I have a little bit more flexibility and maybe can get extra core in there. I am hoping to pretty much bust things open all along the front here with the GDT in the line, with sparse French units, and obviously the Belgians are barely a barrier at all once I start hitting them again. However, we're going to go to the counter movement phase, and it's time for me to go to bed. Big news, Antwerp fell, and that triggers some reinforcements in 3 turns and some withdrawals and such not, including the withdrawal of the AG Belgian, whatever it is, army group. So that'll free things up. 1st Army is probably going to shift something to 2nd so that the 2nd Corps can come up, etc. La la la. Nothing too exciting there. I'm going to be thinking about when I want to flood this. There's a die roll involved in that. And in terms of the combats themselves, they didn't go terribly well for the Germans. But one key factor did go very well, which is that we took some of the fortifications around Nancy, and they were actually destroyed as well. This unit. Elsewhere, attritional attacks that largely didn't accomplish much, although we are wearing out things like the GDT, and we got a hex here. Again, if a hex is that important, you can trade losses for it, but I view this as more about battering the enemy army with the advantage of the offense, where you're able to bring basically two or even sometimes 3 stacks against 1. To get better odds, you can use the prepared assault, whatever. But in some cases, that's still not enough. You still end up suffering more. The CEL losses are really what you end up taking from the combat. But if you start pushing the attack and trying to take hexes, well, you'll start taking more combat casualties. Now, I've taken, generally the way the combat chart is set up, most of the times when you actually take an S loss, both sides take it. It's just indicating like this incredibly volatile or violent combat going on. Usually the best results are where the enemy breaks, takes a lot of CEL losses, and just falls back. They're really over on the bad side of things. Like if you're doing really horrible attacks, you can take losses without the defender taking losses. But for the most part, they seem to be exchanges in casualties, which means, your units are being weakened and the defending units are being weakened. And how does that work out? Well, since the defender is the smaller force, that's probably still to the attacker's advantage overall. So no big deal that you suffer those. It is a big deal, though, if you're saying, I'm going to intensify the attack and I'm going to take a casualty anytime, I wouldn't have retreated him anyway. That's kind of, you really got to desire to take that hex. And I don't have that kind of desire. I'm just not that bloody-minded, especially since the Germans are not having a lot of resources. I forgot to move something during the reaction movement. That rail unit, that should be sliding down. Otherwise, we're done with the turn. As I start the Entente turn, not a pleasant situation. We got the BEF and the Belgians pulling back, trying to keep the linkage. Things are getting more difficult, though. The GDT is going away. They managed to finally combine those cav. Again, not necessarily a combination substitution I really wanted. It's hard to tell. I had one better cav unit and one worse brigade. And now I've got 2 kind of lousy cav divisions, but eventually they combine into a cav corps. I don't know when that's going to happen. And life would just get too confusing if I don't make these substitutions. I don't think I'm required to try to do them. You can see the front line is not where I want it. The Brits are trailing their formation back, much as the Belgians are. And now this is going to force the French to fall back upon that. But the complication here is the GDT goes away. And that means I have a single corps that can hold 4 units, a little larger than most corps. 4 divisions, which means, for whatever reason, I'm not sure if I was limited to 4 divisions to the old corps, but I got to find room for that. And that's got to go in the 5th Army. And that means we got to do some kind of shift backwards. to get units into something else. We also probably have to continue trying to rationalize the line and pull it back so that it connects at some level to the BEF and the Belgians. The BEF is not bad units, but they've been mauled, being sort of the spear point that was struck when the Belgians fell back. The Belgians aren't really able to hold a line, and they're in a problematic position, and that's all there is to it. But yeah, I mean, I've already got a weakened French line, and now I have to, try to fill that gap, stretching it out even more. Almost as much of a problem. The GDT wagon, their supply train, starts no closer to the line than I'm sitting. They're like 10 hexes from way back there somewhere. And, that's fine if you have the historical advances by the Germans. But with what I've got, it would be problematic, except the supply wagons don't really matter. I got plenty of rail. Net effect of the Entente movement, giving up a little bit more ground here. We just don't want to fight where we're overwhelmed, and there's no real reason for it. We lost the river line here. Let's just keep falling back. If we have to give up some of the mountains, we give them up. I mean, they're not worth anything. Nothing back here is worth anything. The only thing that matters is if the Germans get this far, they can start, not that far, this far, they can start scoring down here. And that would be terrible. But we've got Epinal in the way and a fair line of fortresses. That would have to get blown through, this river line. That can be where we fall back to if need be. Yeah. We hope it won't come to that. But there's, and garrison this as well, and that's really all. Actually, we don't even need that, but we need to garrison the gap. But this position would be thrown into question. Of course, so what? It's one value point in that whole region, another one down here. That's all this is all worth. But the biggie is what we're giving up in terms of in the north. Now, it's nothing like historically. Again, this unit, which is struggling its way down, and I don't want to entrain it. It's not worth shit. I got my supplies over the rail because whatever. Oh, and this can go away. GDT is all gone now. I still feel like we're doing quite well with what we're holding, even though there's tremendous weaknesses and the line, I know I'm going to give up more ground. But the further this gets pushed back, the harder it is to hold everything. So, there's a certain advantage to trying very hard not to get thrown back any further. Because really we'd be giving up a lot of northern France and have a very hard time, we start getting piles of troops down here, but then again, the Germans, very late in the game, start getting some big piles. They have some coming in before that, it looks like, too. Right then. German side of the player turn, we pushed forward, made a couple kind of ineffectual attacks. Well, very ineffectual. One over here where we really got hurt. One over here where we only got hurt a little bit. Trying to pick on the Belgians, see if we can get them moving quicker than, I don't know. But trying to leak our way through Antwerp and make it so that we can put a little bit more pressure on them. Not a lot of gain, obviously. In fact, other than just stepping on territory that the enemy had abandoned, it did not go well. And of course, taking our time, recovering, in certain places where we fell back here to recover, we had gained a little bit of space on that line. Okay. My way through the German moves. Well, let me give a little background. I generally try not to pay too much attention to all this command organization stuff. For the most part, it just fiddles itself properly. Well, I find myself with a problem though, which is that I got this 4th CC core and it's not assigned to any army. I don't know what that means. I mean, I can't find its counter in the set. Maybe it's fallen somewhere. I don't know. You know, like onto the map or something. I have no idea. But similarly suspicious, I have the 6C and 3C, which don't seem to exist. Does one of them turn into the 4CC? Yeah. So we had some kind of substitution going on. All right, what about the 6C? Well, that doesn't flip into anything. That got converted. So I must have done some sort of substitution to get the 4CC in the place of those two units. I don't know when it happened. I guess I should look back. That happened back on game turn 7. And because in the recent memory, I remember pulling the counters off. I must have just not noticed that, you know, I didn't have my command counters in play. But that shows you how little attention I pay to them. Is that, yeah, you know, it's been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 turns that this has been an error, basically. And it just didn't reflect in my head. I'm sure there are plenty of other little surprises baked in. I try to catch things when, you know, or I try to do, to correct problems or to check things when I'm going to launch an attack or something. But it's a lot harder, and this sector has been kind of quiet. Now you can see I'm erupting all over the place. But it's a lot harder in a quiet sector to, you know, fall back and think about, hey, what's going on here? And in this case, I'm like, well, wait a minute, why are those commands not, why is this unit not there? Where is it? I got to get it into that place. And then where the hell are these others? And yeah, that's what happens. So after that, we go to the counter move phase. What happens is the Germans pressing a little bit up here, not as hard as I want it to be. A lot more here than I want to be, and trying to make some kind of push in the center here. I'm just having trouble finding the troops that can sustain the attack there, but we'll see. And then over here, I've shifted one of the siege artillery things to attack. What is this? Tool. The fortress is at Tool, and try to crack a hole in the line over there. That would be a big deal if I can reduce that. It connects with the Nancy attacks as well. It's like just cave in this whole portion and take away that strong defensive stance there. I mean, there's a lot to gain in this game if you can punch a hole down here in the south. It's not in the victory point spaces, but it's in the, hey, every turn I get more points. You know, if I'm looking at 45-57 as opposed to what I'm sitting at, which is 45-17, that's a huge difference in points. That's a 40-point swing. Yeah, I mean, 45-17, that means I'm going to be looking at minus 25 points probably, and assuming I make some more ground. Whereas here, we'd be looking at nearly plus 20 points. So, yeah. A wide swath of German attacks did not do terribly well, as seems to be usually the case. I end up on the 2-to-1 table on average on most of these attacks, and that's including the shift for the prepared attack, because the army has ground down, in terms of actual strength points. The French are in better position strength-wise. They didn't expend as much just plowing into the enemy so far. We didn't gain any ground anywhere. We didn't try very hard, except up here, right there. You can see we kind of put ourselves in a dangerous position. There was a thought that the French would counterattack, but their command structure was wrong for it, and they will probably end up tightening their line. Although there's some danger to that. I mean, I want to get across here, but I can't really give up this position is the problem. But yeah, getting behind that river line would make sense. And failed against the Brits, but we did chase, we did chase the Belgians a little bit further, and we're just gonna, keep pushing them. But it's on, I mean, the main thing is they keep falling back rather than we're really, really beating the shit out of them. If they decided that they had enough troops to hold that line, or to try to hold the line, like enough density, and they were far enough back, they're not far enough back yet, the Brits have to keep falling back, it would be a lot harder to dislodge them. Same thing with the GDT. Even though these units aren't, particularly effective in the combat line, you just push them a couple hexes. You don't get these huge breakthroughs or anything. The huge breakthrough comes from either a gap being present or the threat of a gap forcing the enemy to fall back, which is kind of what's happening, is that the Belgians and Brits keep falling back. I don't think I'm going to get anywhere near the historical goals here because I moved too slowly early on and didn't succeed, in smashing things hard enough. And the Brits are a nice butt plug for this. They decent troops in an area where otherwise there really aren't any. I gotta look for cav retreats and see if any fortresses go, but it's pretty much just clean up between turns. And we're seeing the Entente continuing to fall back a little bit everywhere, kind of, especially centered there, but elsewhere, also along here, a little bit of falling back. Trying to get to a river line, figuring we're going to lose that too, but, just slow down things, because advances in the center are going to be more painful. With where the Germans are right now, they're actually going to take a penalty. We're on the turn before the interphase. That means a couple of things. First of all, I got to make sure I have a contiguous line. I do for the French, and that's important. The Germans do not, but they have this turn and their player turn to make that up. And I have to remember to do that, or the penalty might be quite high. I mean, it's not going to be that terrible, right? Not compared to what I'm paying there. There's a space here I'm missing, a space here I'm missing. And that's it, because, well, no. Yeah, that's it, because that gets me to the location. So I'm a couple of points in the hole if I don't align, which might mean it's worth continuing the attack for, a couple of points in some cases. We'll see. The contiguous line isn't like you lose the game if you don't do this type of thing, whereas this feels kind of like it is. Hitting the second interphase or later where you haven't made a lot of ground. That feels like a huge penalty. And the fact that it's going to be hard to fight my way through there leads me more and more to wonder, well, maybe I should change my focus of attack. Yes, I can, push the Belgians around a little bit. I don't know what this guy's up to. I can push the Belgians around and they will move, but not all that rapidly, you know. And unless I can create a gap, it's really hard to push forward really, really fast. And maybe I'm fundamentally incapable of pushing forward fast, which means the slower slog through the center might be my more appealing route. Ooh, I have to deal with these guys. I forgot about them. I put the minus CEs. I know they're recovering, but I put it there as a reminder that I had to do something. Not much change. The Germans shifting things around for the most part, not really launching any attacks except a couple up here, one against the Belgians and one against the GDT stuff. They got positive results comparatively, but you know, attritional type stuff that no pushes, no intense attacks. The odds aren't that good, but it does set us up for more of a breakthrough with the prepared attacks that we'll be hitting this turn. We basically picked on things that we didn't think were a bad choice, you know. Trying to set things up so that I don't lose points over here, because I'm going to lose a buttload off of now that I'm finally actually in the victory point scoring area, which again, that seems twisted to me, but whatever. To one of the issues here as I move into the German side of turn 12, which is about a third of the way through September. There's withdrawals. Okay, no biggie there. A brigade, well, whatever, you know, I mean, maybe I didn't use it and get it beaten up as much as possible, but that's fine. But the Metz siege artillery marker. So that is the one counter that's allowed to be deployed once and then can't be undeployed. Well, I didn't understand the why of that. And my feeling was, oh, well, that means that I should be careful and make sure I put it somewhere important, like, you know, when I'm fighting a fortress that I'm worried about being able to take. Well, now it gets withdrawn, and I never used it. Not a big deal, because I've been, as I am with all resources, I have not used up any of my limited ammo. Any of it. That might explain some of what's going on here. You know, I'm not using the prep fire bombs. I'm not using a lot of stuff that would help make things easy, because, again, I have this hoarding mentality where it's like, yeah, I don't get any more of them. I had better save them for when I need them. Now, compare that to the strategic view of the same situation when I'm playing Le Grand Guerre. I blow through all my resources. I mean, I run through my troop replacements and whittle my army down to the bone. I use up all my ammo. I do it because I look at the situation and I say, I got more than him. I can wear him down using, you know, my resources as an attritional chip to force him to put the same up. Here, though, I've got a fixed amount of resources for the duration of the campaign, and I just naturally, when my resources are fixed, won't spend them. I don't. It's now the second time, if I play this again, I will play it very, very differently, because I'm learning lessons. But this is my inherent natural, you know, tendency is, oh, I only have so many of these. Let's not use them until I feel I need them. As opposed to, let's blow them all at the beginning, because if I don't do it then, I'm not going to have the right game. The withdrawal of that 17th ersatz brigade, which I finally found, because it doesn't have a command token. Well, I don't know that, so I look through all my army charts, don't see it anywhere, and realize I will have to pick through every piece on the board. Well, I got lucky. I started on the southern half. That's the most likely place where an ersatz unit was going to be. And I found out where it is. It's down here. Well, that just blew a hole in my lines. A hole that's going to be really hard to recover from. I may have to extend a unit here and try to move things around to get something into place there. I don't really know, because I don't have anything back here. Unless I have another unit to put in the line there, I've just opened up a gap. Now, I'm not that worried about the French surging through the gap, although that's a possibility, to tell you the truth. More worried about the one victory point every bloody interphase, I guess. And this happens right before the interphase, so I don't have time to ship a unit from another army or something over there. Yeah, that's not a pleasant thing to do to someone. I don't have an answer for this whole, the combination withdrawals, the upgrades, all this shit that's going on that adds a whole lot of complexity to this board situation. In terms of you really have to spend a lot of mechanical effort finding the pieces and figuring out what to do with them and remembering, things that you have that can be combined, but maybe you don't want to or can't right now. All that kind of shit. That stuff is very, very painful in terms of an overall burden in the game. And I guess you could just forget about it in some cases. Like with the combination, say, well, I don't need it now. I'll just put this aside, and if, I want to figure out what that's for. At least those have a color coding that helps you somewhat find them on the board sometimes. But man, in this case, it's throwing this pain in the ass. And again, I know the why. I don't think it should be a withdraw this specific unit ever. But the problem is with those combo substitutions and stuff, you can't withdraw something at random. The system's too inflexible in terms of the reinforcement chart. And when giving you command of, essentially a theater, it just has its issues there. Is it the biggest burden in the game? No, but it may be the biggest one that feels very pointless because the army command structure is making a lot more sense on this more dense battlefield than it did in the Serbian game. Peskiness about this. So the Belgian Marine brigade here did not need one of these markers, yet I had one on the board. You could tell that it doesn't, but again, this isn't stressed enough. Whether or not a unit is placing its organizational counter should be expressed in the setup replacement charts, whatever they are, rather than, just leaving it up to the player to try to figure out. Again, that's a hurdle for the first play. Next time I play it, I'll probably remember. Well, we're making a big assumption if there's a next time I play, because I'm hoping my life will not be nearly that long, and had high doubts about that in terms of these longer games, just because of the accumulation of games, the feeling, the need to play new things each time. In part because of the videos, but also, hey, I got so many games, I got to make sure I play them all, right? Even if only once. But yeah, again, it's a matter of, well, I had things a little wrong. And would I have noticed? Well, I might not have needed this counter. But it means that this was loose from any organizational considerations at all, which is a different, it becomes an asset. Even though it's a brigade-size unit, there's not any kind of consistency. Some brigade units are assets, some are not, and it's dependent on what the counter looks like rather than anything else. Which again, that's me coming to this from the Serbian game where there was a clear distinction. Brigades were not assets, regiments were assets, and brigades were, I think, across the board formations. Here, it's kind of, again, there's this weird combination of like certain rigid things that are applied inconsistently. But anyway, now I have the Marine Division in play, which I think is going to be swapped for something else, which does need that. And when I looked at the division, I'm like, well, I looked at this, didn't see a thing, and I was wondering where that organizational counter was. Well, it was already on the board, because when I set it up, it wasn't clear that I do not place the organizational counter there. It's almost like you have to play this once to get used to enough of its quirks to be able to play it for real. And it kind of has taken me this long to come up with the issues that I've identified and internalized about, things that I have to understand about the game to play it. And there may be more coming. I'm not even halfway through the game. But, a good enough chunk in that it's not like I play a few turns and I know how to play it. And playing a few turns of the Serbian game didn't give me a real view of how to handle that either. It did give me the base mechanisms, but I came into this with a fair understanding of those then. So I don't think I would have gained much out of the first couple turns unless I had been carefully following the history at the same time and realized, wow, I'm not meeting these objectives. Why? Complain about these factors. There's one thing they could have done to make this worse, which is the thing that was done in games like, the one that sticks the hardest in my mind about this is the Desert Fox, where you withdraw units from the board and they come back later on this, again, a very rigid type of chart where you pick a specific unit. Now they have rules for units that are destroyed so that you can withdraw units that are destroyed. You can withdraw another unit, or you do withdraw another unit in place of a unit that's destroyed. But that adds its own complexities because there's no way of marking what the unit is that, if it's temporarily withdrawn and comes back into the game 10 turns later or something, you have to start writing notes to yourself and everything to indicate, what that new unit actually is, what the replacement is, and that may be an issue. And I got a combo with the cav here. The guard cav is going to combine with another cav. That's cool. It makes me a big unit, which is better than these little cav units, but it does generate a bit of a problem because the only nearby cav that I have that I can combine with is busy watching a fortress try to erode. Oh well. By considerations, in general, the game kind of, as I'm starting to produce a lot of prepared attacks again in the north, in general, the game kind of, you can ignore them. At least so far I've been able to. Because the rail nets, you're normally close enough that you're within your 5 hexes or whatever of a functioning rail net. But things start getting complicated here in the center. You can see I can't use these crossings. This one, not until turn 17. One just opened up in turn 12 that I'm going to shift over here maybe. I don't know. I've pulled down for no really good reason, but everything's in supply. But I'm going to have trouble if I do push through here in supplying my army that far. And that's a consideration to keep in mind, is that, yeah, once I cross this river line, all bets are kind of off, and that means that I'm not going to be able to just punch through here quickly. Now, some of that has to do, and you can see down here the river line clears up a little earlier. Some of it's already cleared. Some of it's already cleared in the sense that once this river is blown, the bridge immediately reinstates. Just because, again, it's a rigid time turn-based thing when I haven't captured this even. You know, it shouldn't be recoverable immediately. But tracking that kind of stuff would be too difficult. Obviously, again, I haven't made the advances that are expected, I guess, even down here. However, you know, when you look at how long does it take to repair things, some of it has to do with when it was historically captured, which seems an odd choice. And some of it has to do with where the resources were deployed. Resources were deployed over here. You don't see many of those. Any bridges or anything that were damaged were immediately dealt with because this is the focus of the plan. And again, that doesn't give you really the theater-wide control that you feel like you should have when you're running the whole theater. You know, I'm not sure that I like the premise of this game, which seems to be you will follow this plan, not because you're forced to by rules, but because the terrain is built in such a way as to, and when I say terrain, I mean these repair rates and when the units are pushed, etc. It's built that way so that you can't do anything else. You know, your supply is not going to be able to be linked up here. You're not going to be able to devote your engineers to an offensive in this direction because they're already accounted for over here. You know, in some sort of that feels like a weird sort of thing to ossify into the situation when you have so much capability of fiddling around with other little aspects, and there's so much else that the game represents details on. Obviously, it would be a high expense to the game, both in terms of additional counters, but much more problematic in terms of the effort that the player would have to pay to properly allocate, you know, resources to repairing some of these things, indicating different costs of different types of bridging, all kind of stuff like that. And we're talking about, you know, some of those really overblown victory games. I'm thinking things like Flashpoint Golan here, where you've got all kind, and Central America for that matter, which I did recently, all kinds of different things where you have to really look at these special rules and look at all these charts and everything to figure out all kind of stuff. And you get so tied up in the minutiae under those circumstances that you can't really make the big plan. But here, you can't make the big plan because the big plan's being forced on you. It's already in place. That I find somewhat disturbing. Again, what can you do? I don't know. You know, within the confines of, you know, some of the basic design decisions that were made as to the level of detail of certain things and not imposing a ridiculous burden, this gives you a chance to explore Schlieffen in a lot of detail. But what's problematic for me is, as someone who's looking at a situation that I kind of, you know, fucked up on the Schlieffen, I'm not able to devote that engineering effort over to this side. Now, you know, you can do some hand-waving stuff. Well, you know, the general staff they're not happy with what you're doing, but they're not removing you. They're, nobody in the command is able to remove you, but they're able to drag their feet because they want to support this. So all the engineers are up there. Demands, filling this in, not so much. Mainly, though, the extension of the line and the general fatigue of the German 6th Army at this point. It's pretty beaten up. It's made some nice gains, but it's out of gas. And this may be a sign where the Entente can make a counterattack. The First Army has its problems too, if I recall correctly. Doesn't look too bad. But there's a possibility that as the Germans thin their line to try to recover, a corps here, a corps there, and over a number of turns maybe come up with another position where I can make an offensive. Or else do kind of sporadic shit like I'm doing down here. Well, that weakening makes me kind of ripe for an attack. The majority of the effort up here in the north, probably nowhere near fast enough to accomplish Germany's goals in this game, just because I didn't make that jump in the first place. And, that's the thing. When you play a game for the first time, you're bound to make rules errors, but beyond that, you very often are going to make some kind of major strategic flaw because you don't necessarily. So in this case, I don't feel like it was a strategic flaw. My aim was to push through here as hard as possible. I tried to do that from a strategic point of view, but my manipulation of the rules didn't make it clear to me that I would need to push harder than I did. And now, after seeing the outcome of what sort of my intrinsic, use of the pieces came up with, well, I would play this very differently. I guess the lesson there is, for this particular scenario in the system, certainly, the Germans have the burden on them in terms of being able to, what they need to do is not going to be intuitive, at least not for me. And that probably the more experienced player should play the Germans, take the offensive there. Of course, some people see it as there's no fun unless you're the one making the attacks. Well, I got to tell you, I would have a lot of fun stopping the Germans this way. So, if someone less experienced, as experienced as I was at the beginning of this, were to want to take the Germans, I'd be like, okay, but, there's a good chance I'm going to stop you dead in your tracks. Kind of like the warning I gave. Well, I gave this warning in Vietnam when a less experienced player wanted to play the U.S. He went ahead with the U.S. and came up with the conclusion that I had, which is that the U.S. is unwinnable. But, taking the harder side when you're the less experienced player is not a good plan. But most especially in the Korean War, where I have to play that game usually twice to make the U.S. survive, and then it comes out pretty much historical. On that second play. And then I put it away for a few years, I come back, and then the first time I play it, I'm like, how can the U.S. possibly survive? Well, same person, by the way, who I played Vietnam with, the person I played Korean War with was like, oh no, I want to be the U.S. I'm like, okay, but it's a lot harder. And I just proceeded, as carefully and devastatingly as I could to advance with the North Koreans, and there just was nothing he could do to stop me, because there's some kind of trick, and I don't know what it is until I play the U.S. and fail. Like I might have been able to stop him, had he played the Koreans, the North Koreans, but I don't know. There was some kind of trick to playing the U.S. and managing to survive in that southern area well enough that you can come out with an offensive. In fact, you just have to basically survive because MacArthur's landing at Incheon is going to break the whole thing open along with the supply considerations. But the problem is that early part of the game holding on. Now, this was the same player who, wanted to play the Union in Lee versus Grant, and he managed to get around my lines and totally fuck me up. So he's not an incompetent player. In fact, in that game, I showed my incompetence even though knowing the system better. So it's just, sometimes it seems like he always wants to play what I would call the harder role in the game. Although honestly, I'm not sure who's the harder role in Lee versus Grant because the costs of fucking up as Lee are so high. Massive attacks had mixed results, which is pretty positive to tell you the truth. Anytime I get anything other than, at best, attrition. Here we got some impressive gains without the cost of having to do intensive attacks. First of all, the attacks scared the Entente, and they pulled back. So a lot of what you're seeing there in terms of, wow, that looks really effective, is actually just the, oh shit, these forces aren't going to be able to hold the line. We're going to start falling back so we can recover units a strength point during our player turn. That may not be the case if advances had been made, but the units that held there actually did a pretty decent job. Where the impressive stuff happened was actually more to the center of the battlefield, where you see advances here and here. Now this is really important. This is hex column 45. That means I'm only going to be losing 10 points this turn instead of 18 or something like that, right? So the fact that I delayed my advance here until I could push advances here actually seems to be helping me if I read the rules, if I've read the rules correctly as to how the victory points are assessed. I don't think there's a weird sort of balance in this, right? Which is that there's a lot of victory point spaces up here in the north. So a lot of important or moderately important stuff is expected to fall to that Schlieffen plan, which maybe offsets the cost for making the attacks in the north and taking the penalty, making your advance in the north. That penalty will decrease over time, either because you're pushing here and getting less pain for each interphase, or because you've broken through and you're, collecting 0 or even positive points from your advance on Paris. Either one of those is acceptable. Okay, but here I've managed to make up for my slowness to some extent, maybe. Make up for some of these points that I'm not going to get up there. 8 points, that's 2 or 3 of those locations, I don't remember which, at the end of the game. So I don't have to go as deep because I have not been paying any penalty. And that might work out all right. The Allied lines are not in good shape. However, the German lines had some problems too. An assault here, which was pretty hefty, ended up actually breaking the German units deep enough that they had to fall back, which is to say they got in the 7 to 9 range from the results table. I don't know why these are white circles and not black circles. I think that they're mandatory retreats, not some kind of thing that requires the intensive attack to take place. But I'm not positive. See, here they specify intense retreat. Here they do not. They just say retreat 1 or 2 hexes. Managed to, keep the line together even through those retreats, and that was a close run thing, honestly. Artillery fired here, didn't do anything significant. I gotta remember, I did one hit. I actually threw some of the 30.5 centimeter units into play to try to bust up that fort. Well, all I got was a grand total of one hit through everything that I launched, which means I can waste all my ammo on that fortress. It's an A-ranked fortress, which is why I started throwing the bigger guns in. But, you know, it's going to take a while and a lot of ammo to bust that thing up. I was hoping just to capture it. Well, actually, no. This was the attack I made. I'm hoping just to capture it, you know, with ground troops, because that's easier than busting things up with all my limited ammo. But, you know, what's my ammo for if I'm not going to bombard the emplaced positions with it. We got to go to the interphase. I'll do that before I finish things up. No fortresses fell. There's a couple of them. The Germans are still sitting in front of, waiting for them to just decay on their own. The problem that I'm facing that I wanted to bring forward, my camera's been having problems. Something's been having problems. And I'm really not looking forward to this. Every time I load up videos, it becomes a much, much more intensive process than it used to be, where I'm constantly having to pop the memory chip out. Being who I am, I have lots of suppositions as to where the problem lies. It's probably not in the camera because this predates this camera. My prior camera was causing problems too. It's either in the USB cable that I'm using for the data link or in the memory chip. And being who I am, I haven't replaced either. Now, I would have replaced the cable, but I can't find another cable. Now, that's really weird because I have a bunch of these cameras, but I just don't know where the fuck the other cables are. And this is probably from one of the older of these cameras. So if there's something wrong with the pins there, they're a little loose or something, that would cause issues. The other possibility is that I've damaged the memory card, and I have another one that's big enough. It's about half the size of this. This is like a 64 gig. I mean, there's just so much fucking memory on so little, so tiny a piece of stuff. The other one's like a 32, and maybe my wife has one that'll fit as well. But because I haven't had the cable, I'm like, well, I suspect that more for some reason. And I just don't understand the way that I think about things. But I really have to try doing this with something different because this doesn't make any fucking sense. Part of me is like, well, you know, you could buy replacement things. But the problem is that this may be the last camera of this kind that I get. It's not the same as the earlier ones. It feels, well, first of all, it burns hotter. It uses up more juice. But also, I just don't trust it. More of the functionalities on the screen, and the screens are the thing that dies on these fuckers, and I haven't been able to repair them. I watched some videos on it and just can't get the screen, the collapsible screen off. It takes more force than I'm willing to apply, given, or it appears to, you know. And then, you know, my backups are a camera that does use the same kind of chip, but the one that gives this weird yellowy tint to everything. And then another one of this brand that claims to be the same make and everything, but doesn't use any of the same equipment. It uses a different, bigger battery, probably because they just kept loading up more functionality into these things and making them hotter and hotter, and I don't like that at all. And my battery charger won't work with it. I only have one battery instead of the 3 that I have, or maybe more for this one. And then also, it uses a different kind of memory card. that I have no copies of, or maybe if I have one, it's a tiny one that would not be sufficient. So I'm just in this weird fucking position. I know that I can fall back to that stupid yellow tinted one. Anyway, let me get to the, part of it is like, I'm always hoping I'll fucking die before these problems exhibit themselves. That's just all, more and more, that's become my hope towards things, to avoid any of these problems. Maybe I'll be dead before it's a real issue. Getting less and less hope that way, but whatever. But anyway, let's go to the interface. It looks like we're going to start getting ammo reductions. We have to roll the French reserves again, and then, the standard stuff that shows up. Painful interface. So I think that rounds it out. Piles and piles more improved positions. Obviously, the Entente is using theirs up, which makes me happy. The Germans less so, because, well, other than back here, there's very little where I'm trying to hold a line. And I built them where they're most important. I've got these hopes of, breaking the French position here, so I'm a little less exuberant about building these up. If the French look like they're going to attack, I might do so. There are places where I haven't, though, like here, where maybe I should, along this line, whatever. Doesn't make a damn bit of difference here. That's already a 2-point improved position. But we got those ammo reductions. Now, they say artillery ammo. I'm going to have to look up the rules on them, because just having the artillery doesn't make that much of a difference. It makes a difference, but it's not that huge. But having the strength points makes a big difference, and I thought it was complete combat. Ooh, what's all this? Well, we haven't gotten there yet, have we? Where is the surrender of Antwerp thing? It's coming up on the next phase, but I didn't realize that Allied units were affected by it as well. So that's going to be a big thing that happens very, very shortly. Replacement points. So the Brits used up 1. The French used up nowhere near their total. They're up at, I guess, 17 in reserve now. I have to look up to see if they're allowed to have more than 10. And just have been assuming they have. I placed them wherever I could. The reserve divisions got their improvement, and that's basically a 1 CEL improvement across the board. My eyes are having trouble. Maybe the camera can help me. See what these say. That looks like it's a T and not an R. That's what my eyes were telling me, but I'm not positive. There's a bunch of units that are territorial, the GDT ones. I don't know when they improve. I think they may be individual units that come in as opposed to anything else. I do not know. But yeah, this, created across the board a significant strengthening. Any individual unit, you're kind of like, well, so what? But honestly, those reserve units were kind of a weakness sitting in the French line. The reserves for the Germans are all, top quality units for the most part. I think there are some that have 4 combat quality, but, whatever. What else? But the Germans used up most of theirs, and unlike the Entente, they are not a healthy army. They've got a significant number of units that have strength reductions, especially up here where the assaults have been the heaviest, which is one of the reasons why I'm kind of like, geez, had I pushed harder, well, had I pushed harder, maybe I'd be deeper in, and at cost, but maybe that ground would have been easier to get than it is now. Not sure how big a deal it makes. Again, the victory conditions for this are a little weird because of that column thing. I took my -10 there. You can see the Germans are down to +7. At least they're still in positive territory, something that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gained this ground here on the Third Army. That was a nice improvement. But, honestly, we're close, right? I mean, up here, we're at 44.29, which would be 13 or so. So even if we hadn't made those pushes here, we would still not be suffering the point penalty that we're suffering up here. Which maybe if we broke the Belgians earlier, we would be taking a bigger penalty for it all. And again, it's weird because it balances out against the expected towns to take, and I'm just not sure how to get a grasp on all that. I talked about the ammo shortage markers. They're both down here. The French were toying with the idea of shifting this corps, 7th Corps, into play and trying to launch an attack here. And they might still do it. 8 attacks is a pretty good quantity. Eventually, though, this may become a greater backwater. What you see is the chits are not all the same. And you may put a weaker one in a different place. Eight divisions worth of combat strength, though. That allows me to make the 1 or 2 attacks I'm probably going to make down there if I do anything. So I don't feel at all bad about putting it there. And from the German point of view, this is a dead front. Everything else is moving potentially. I would like to. This would be another quiet possibility in the Verdun area. I would like to make some advances there, but I just can't ever find the troops to put there, mainly because the 6th Army is continually fighting and unwilling to give up any of its force. I kind of picture the commanders in play, not being cooperative. It's all under my control, but they still seem to have their own minds. Anyway, I think that's all that I have to do for the interface, which means we're set up for the next set of 3 turns. What are we looking at? September 13th at this point. The advance is nowhere near the historical in the north, but is this a worse situation anyhow? I don't know. I mean, it's just so hard for me to judge. I think I would much rather have swung through, and that would give me many options, right? I could make the attack towards Paris, make the attack to try to go around Paris, which doesn't seem that valuable, or try to flank the whole position and break the flank. And I'm kind of saddened that I'm not going to be able to see the effects of that in this game, because I'm used to seeing them in something like La Grande Guerre, where they don't really gain, that sort of being able to crush through in the north doesn't necessarily give you that huge an advantage in terms of pressure on the rest of the line if you divert it that way, which is kind of an interesting consideration, because I always look at the flanking advantages and they don't really play out that way. And then with Der Weltkrieg, I got a much closer to the historical play through, I think. I made a lot of ground in the north, and the mechanisms of this game are just less intuitive, and therefore, I don't understand how to express the strategy that, I had in my mind in order by actually manipulating the pieces on the board correctly. And a lot of that has to do with the force march rules. I really just couldn't bring myself to reduce my CELs further, because the reduction of CELs means you can't attack as much, but and it wouldn't need to attack as much if I had created a gap earlier before it could be patched easily. All right, up it goes. Trying to avoid this nightmare, but the more I vid, the worse the nightmare will be.